Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. My name is Christophe Difo. I'm here with my friend.
I'm Sean Prophet.
And we are going to talk to you today a little bit about, or to each other and also to you, I guess, about free speech and the First Amendment and issues surrounding that. So certainly free speech, hate speech, and things of that nature. So I'm now going to, I guess, my cat's here too. So first of all, let me talk about my t-shirt. Let me just talk about my real quick. I'm gonna talk about my t-shirt. So anyway, so this is, I'm here to piss off liberals as much as I'm here to piss off conservatives. I'm kidding, but this is a emblem from Mac v. SOG, which was a Vietnam era sort of black ops operation operating in Cambodia and Laos out of South Vietnam. And they were the most badass of the badass. Every kind of sort of modern military, hardcore American sort of, commando sort of modeled off of this. Started by, I think, John F. Kennedy. So anyway, that's my t-shirt spiel for today. I'm going to kick it over now to Sean, who also has an interesting t-shirt.
Yeah, well, I figured since everybody probably already noticed, I have a Live Long and Prosper t-shirt. And I figured since Christophe started out our little t-shirt game, I might up the game a little bit on the Star Trek side. So here we are. And I love your shirt. I mean, I think that bottom line is that, it is interesting. Obviously, our special forces have been involved in some pretty bad shit. But, at the same time, if we are a powerful nation, we need to have a good defense. And I think, our biggest problem, I think, with all of this has been leadership and corruption, because, our fighting men and women are second to none. And all of us sleep better at night because we have them. So I think that what we're all fighting for, I'm sure you agree, Christophe, is that we have, the right leadership from the commander in chief, because then these, if there's integrity at the top, then these black ops programs and special ops programs are going to be doing good, not evil. So, that's
exactly right. And I think that again, here I might piss off some liberals, but it is a misunderstanding of human nature and the nature of our planet to think that we can just sort of fold ourselves into our own country and have our little defensive perimeter and leave it at that. I mean, I defend Obama on the drone program in the same way. Like, I am not a pacifist. There are really fucked up people out there that want us to fail, definitely. And if there's no one there to defend us, and by the way, let's talk about defending the principles that the United States is supposed to be about, and we can talk about what that means. But certainly things like freedom, justice, like those things, freedom's not free. I know that's the most absurd thing to say. I'm embarrassed. Go ahead,
it's the topic of our show. We're talking about freedom of speech here, and we wouldn't have freedom of speech if it wasn't defended by a large military. Okay, there are many places in the world. I mean, just let's talk about China. I mean, China is famously censorious, and they crack down on the internet. They crack down on everything. They are a very brittle government, and they cannot tolerate their citizens having their own opinions, and even down to the social credit system, where if you are observed to violate any rule or law or whatever, you cannot travel. You might be fired from your job. There's so many consequences there to having a different opinion, and they will surveil you. They will. So, and it's not just China. I mean, Russia, it's North Korea, it's every dictatorship. Once the first thing they do is they shut down the press, they shut down free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of worship, all of those things. They shut those things down. So, it does. It's very important that we talk about free speech, because it is one of our core rights that we have, and yet
absolutely
it still has a downside. So,
absolutely, and that's critical, I think, Sean, because like we liberal democracies, it's easy for us here in liberal democracies to forget, I think, some of the things that you just mentioned, right? We really do take them for granted, and we certainly, and this is, I am a student of the military, of military history and military in general, but one thing that you read in pretty much every memoir certainly in the most recent wars, is just coming back to what they would call the world from wherever they are out there in the middle of some like just, that's really war zone. It's a terrible, terrible place, right? And you come back and you realize they come off the plane and they're like, no one here even realizes there's a whole war going on out there, right? And so we live in this sort of beautiful, we're lucky, we're fortunate. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else, but we are liberal democracies, but it's really easy to become complacent, right? And sort of, and next thing you know, we have a guy running the country right now who is trying to shut down the press. I mean, doesn't have press briefings, right? Like, I mean, it has an actively hostile approach to the press and free speech.
Right. Well, and this is always one of the things that bothered me about the peace movement. I mean, I'm as liberal as they come. I don't want any wars to happen that don't need to happen. Okay. I mean, exactly. I think that, the fact that the Iraq War, the Vietnam War both started on false pretenses, and there have been so many times when, the government through its corruption and, the military industrial complex has, they want to start wars so that they can make money. And that's what it comes down to. But what I could not stand about what happened during the 1960s is that morphed into this hostility to the soldiers, to the point where these guys who are over there experiencing stuff that nobody in this country has ever experienced, suddenly they come back and they're being spat on, by protesters and things like that. That should never happen.
And that's really, yes, you're absolutely right, Sean. And it's appalling on so many levels. I think that the main thing is just the privilege of having no idea. Like, you're a college student in the 60s, right? You're privileged. You don't have to go to the fucking war. And then you're going to spit on the poor people, right? Because the poor kids went and fought that war, right? That's who went and fought that war. That's who always fights those wars. And you're going to spit on them when they come back? They didn't go. They were drafted.
Well, particularly now, because I mean, the draft actually did take a lot of middle class and wealthy people. A lot of them found ways to get out of it. They became conscientious objectors, or they went to Canada, or they did whatever they did. But once they abolished the draft, they had to recruit talent voluntarily, and most of the people who wanted to go were poor.
Exactly. Because because it's an opportunity for it's a space for opportunity, right? You can get your college paid for, you can get a decent job, and I think for a lot of people, so years and years ago, I spent a lot of time around guys. I was in a halfway house for a lot of reasons that we can get into at a different time. This is when, in my very early years, I was 18, 19 years old, and I spent a lot of time at that time around guys that gotten out of prison, like right out of prison, right? And one guy that I spent time with, I became very friendly with him, and his name was Ben. I won't say his last name, but he was a former Marine, and he got discharged from the Marine Corps for striking a staff officer, and he ended up having a drug problem and all this kind of stuff. But my point is that he would always say, and he came from a very, very, very poor neighborhood in Camden, and he and his brother were drug dealers, and they ran a block. Right. And he eventually got in trouble, But what he always remembers is that when he went to the military, his family was proud of him. Right. He wasn't just some guy on the block anymore. He had the uniform. He had the honor. Right. It meant something. Right. And I think that is what can draw people into the military at this point. Poor people, people with not a lot of opportunity. You get that thing. You get paid, and you get but you also get respect.
Right. And I think that ever since, even during the Iraq War, even though there was a lot of liberals who were very, very upset about the Iraq War, rightfully so, there was still, the same person would have a peace sticker, and they would also have support our troops on there.
Exactly.
And I think that the stuff that happened in Vietnam was that I think that's kind of over now, that people understand that it's an honorable profession, and it always should be. Which Absolutely. Makes the commander-in-chief that much more important. You can't have
exactly. And like we're talking about, to bring it back to the rights, right? The rights that we have, that they are defending, that we are they are the tip of the spear of defending those rights, right? And that's critical,
Well, and in terms of free speech, they're fighting under the American flag, partially for people's right to burn the American flag if they want to.
Yes, exactly.
Which is, I've always,
irony.
That's I've heard from a lot of you get these people, these Trump supporters or whatever, into a Facebook discussion, and they're like, oh, these people are burning the flag. It's like, what do you mean? And they were in the military, of course. I'm like, you do realize that you fought for that right, don't you?
Exactly. And I think that's really interesting, right? Because perhaps a good way to cut into the sort of free First Amendment free speech sort of issue, and that is, and we're going to talk about, I think, maybe a couple Supreme Court cases, but I think what I want to just briefly talk about is Brandenburg versus Ohio, and that was a case in which a KKK member in fact, I'll just read it right now for you. The Brandenburg test was established in Brandenburg versus Ohio to determine when inflammatory speech intending to advocate illegal action can be restricted. And I bring this up because in that particular case, the sort of rhetoric was to go and do something dangerous to Black people or whatever, and it was after a bunch of slurs and all horrible stuff. But the point was that it wasn't imminent. So he wasn't saying, let's go burn a Black people's house right now. Here we go, here are the torches, let's go do it. He was saying, let's at some point in the near future maybe we should burn down some houses. And so the Brandenburg test has established that the speech to be restricted, must be directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and the speech must be likely to incite or produce such action. And so things that don't fall under that are most hate speech, but also, and I think another sort of qualification there is something called fighting words, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But I just want to get your sort of maybe your initial thoughts, Sean, on this.
Well, let's just say that hate speech has been, a law like that, that's a very high bar to meet in terms of anything like that. And even so, like the most open forms of hate speech that used to be said, like the N-word or whatever, go back to your country, those kind of things. I mean, you still see that in video. There's all these videos circulating where people are saying the outright, racist speech, telling people to go back to their country, and sometimes they get slapped or punched or kicked. And what ends up happening there is that you've had a white person commit a clear violation, if not the law, certainly of norms or whatever it is. But then when the person responds by slapping them or hitting them or kicking them, beating them up, that person is now subject to prosecution for assault and battery. So you have this really unequal playing field when it comes to speech. And that's what makes the whole thing so tricky, is everybody wants to have their ability to say whatever they want. And they don't want consequences. And they want to be able to prosecute somebody if they beat them up for using fighting words. So how does this get resolved?
This is so tough. And I like to preface all this by saying I am a lawyer, but I'm not a First Amendment or constitutional lawyer. I'm a labor employment lawyer, but still, I'd like to start, I think, by briefly recounting an experience that I had with fighting words, because fighting words is basically, fighting words exception to the First Amendment is essentially, it's related to the sort of imminency of the Brandenburg test. And that is that, right, if someone comes up to me and says, in fact, I'll just tell the story because it's a perfect illustration of the fighting words problem. So my friend Jeff and I were at a bar downtown Jersey City in 2017. So after the election, after the 2016 election, and we were watching a Rangers hockey game, just joking, drinking. We had gotten there pretty early. Guy came, some drunk white guy, very preppy looking. I mean, like fits the profile of like the typical person who says this sort of thing.
With the fashy haircut and everything.
Oh yeah, the whole thing. The whole thing, like, salmon colored everything, Yeah. So this guy, he comes up to our table and he starts asking me questions like, where do I work? Like, where do I live? And these questions seem innocuous, and I get it. But this is always how these conversations begin. They always begin with these seemingly innocuous questions that are really trying to get at like me and like why do I talk the way I talk? Why do I believe, Anyway, so we finally just shoot him away, and he was wasted, But like now, fast forward 2 hours, 3 hours, and game's over. Jeff and I are walking down the street. This same guy shows up out of the dark, and he comes up next to me, like right up in my face, like this. And he's like talking about how Jersey City used to be this and that, and like, where do you live and why are you here and all this stuff. And I was just like, man, just get away from me. And then he said, all right, fuck you, N-word. And then those were fighting words, my friends. Those were fighting words. Those were fighting words. And I had to take care, we had to take care of business. But look, my point is that there's even that. So here's the interesting point. That after that, it became sort of a scene, right? Some guy came and grabbed me, like bear hugged me. And he said behind me, he was like, stop it before someone calls the police. Jeff, my friend Jeff was with me. White guy, great guy, but perhaps a little bit naive in this way. His first reaction was to try and call the police. And this guy was like, no, that's the last thing you want to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to end up getting in trouble, not this guy, right?
Right.
And this illustrates, I think, the problem.
He's the one who started it. It's like, so this is the thing is, and this is where you have this hiding behind, well, I never touched him. He's the one who punched me first, whatever, but you use these fighting words, right? And the problem is that these things have been dumbed down so much now to the point where even, politicians are able to talk in these dog whistles or dog foghorns, as the case may be. Where
that's a good one. I like that. Yeah. I like that. I hadn't heard that before. Dog foghorns.
Yeah, it is because it's so obvious. I mean, it's like
it's so obvious.
Well, when they say things like, when they say states' rights, I mean, I think everybody's pretty aware of this now, that if you're talking about a southern state, when they say states' rights, they are talking about taking away civil rights. They're talking about the right to deprive people of voting rights, of civil rights, ban abortions, all these things like that. That's what they mean when they say states' rights. So, it is a coded language right there for keeping, Black people, women, down. And so it's an insult right there. And there are other ones too. I mean, and that one was famously said by Lee Atwater, talking about the Nixon administration. He was saying, well, we used to be able to say N-word, 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 but now we just say states' rights and cutting taxes and cutting welfare, and people know exactly what it means. And
exactly,
so
it's all about those euphemisms. About those euphemisms, man, and it's about it gets to the whole problem with conservatism, I think, in general, which is just that, because conservatism is reactionary in its nature. And it also is, so it is resistant to change by its very, very nature. And the problem is that society evolves. It always does. I mean, it sometimes devolves, but oftentimes, certainly in a liberal democracy, conservatives and people who are oppressors in general fail to fully grasp how much people want to be free and equal. Right? They really think that people are going to be okay in their place in the hierarchy, right? You saw this with slavery, where people the sort of happy slave narrative, or that women are women are happy to be subservient. That's their natural state, right? And that's a very conservative perspective of being like, hey, no, people like being where they are, but they always underestimate that. No, people want to be free, and that means they're going to keep fighting for it, and that means society is going to evolve, whether you're comfortable with it or not. And so you have to then, as society evolves, and you still want to say N-word, 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 you have to find a new way to say it, right? And still, and so that's what we see.
And I think that there was a tremendous amount of progress, starting with the Civil Rights Act and going forward, to the point where, most people prior to, really Obama getting elected, Obama is what sort of opened this latest chapter of race conflict. And but prior to that, I mean, if you look at TV shows from the 70s and 80s and films and everything else like that, it's a big Black presence, and people are treated honorably and very normalized. And it was really, I mean, when I was growing up, it was a whispering campaign. There was not an active. It was not okay to actively insult Black people for being Black. It was all a whispering campaign and the dirty jokes. Sure. Everybody knew you don't say that stuff out loud. And so what happened is, with Obama coming in, and then there started to be this groundswell of white people who weren't happy about it, and then so the norms started to shift a little bit. and the things they were saying to him about being Kenyan and not born in the U.S., not one of us, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And they could say that openly, and they just couldn't call him an N-word,
Exactly.
but it was the same thing. They meant the same thing.
Exactly.
And then Trump gets in, and Trump is using this language during his campaign. You could already see the shift starting to happen during his campaign. Calling the specific. He didn't really go to town so much on black people. He started out with immigrants and them being rapists and criminals and that sort of thing. So it started to shift the norms where everybody's like, well, hey, this guy's running for president. If he says that, I could say it. These people don't belong here. And then it just kept escalating. When he won the presidency, it was kind of like, ha ha, you liberal snowflakes, we can say whatever we want now. And that's when the whole free speech debate started kind of coming up again. And
Great point.
But this was stuff that, like, the things he was saying, you could not say in any job in any corporation in America without getting fired. So, that was the norm, not a law. It's not, the First Amendment says that you can't be punished by the government, but it doesn't say that an employer can't fire you. And it doesn't say that if you are someone who, is spouting off this stuff, that you can't be, canceled in whatever way. This whole idea of being politically correct or cancel culture, it's like, that's all fine. If somebody says those things, you can not watch their show, or you can not buy their book.
Exactly.
Or,
Exactly. I think those are all really good points, Sean. And I think what it brings to mind for me is, this idea of, Germany, right? In Germany, it's illegal to say that the Holocaust didn't exist, right? You can't just go out, right? You can't just go out and say that, right? And we can talk about where to draw that line, but in America is the exact opposite sort of approach to free speech. And I think a lot of people think in Germany that there is no free speech in Germany, or that it's like heavy censorship, but that's not at all true. I mean, there's a robust free speech.
It's a very narrow area, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very narrow what you cannot say, and it is specifically connected to their unique history. But my point, though, is that in the United States, you really can say whatever you want. You really can just go out on the block here and just yell the N-word if you'd like. But there are social consequences for that, and so that's good, right? Because, like, if the government's not going to restrict really not just bad ideas, dangerous ideas, right? Really, just with no social value at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's not the government's role, and I think you brought this up, Sean, in our outline, and that is, the role of corporations and social norms fills in that gap, and this sort of makes me think a little bit about the open letter in Harper and in Harper's that has come to the fore in recent days, where a lot of very prominent people, J.K. Rowling, Steven Pinker, sort of like big names,
Noam
they came
Chomsky,
out and said, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, and they came out and said, like, oh no, we you could probably summarize it better than I can, but the gist was, like, we don't want there to be consequences for free speech, right? We want to be able to say whatever we want. The cancel culture is bad. The boycotting is bad. It's bad for democracy. And my response to that is, I mean, I get it. And it can be over the top. It can be like on the left. There's some lunatics on the left too. But those social norms help restrain bad ideas from catching fire.
It's a check and balance. And I mean, I can relate, like Salman Rushdie, for example. He comes from a culture that does not have, a good, long tradition of freedom of speech, and people are regularly murdered for, even renouncing Islam, right? They're exactly death penalty. So I can see where somebody like him is coming from. Margaret Atwood, I mean, her whole thing, The Handmaid's Tale was about this dystopia where, all your rights are taken away. So, I can see what some of these people are getting at. All right. But the problem is that it becomes license at that point. If you know that there is not going to be a consequence, that you can't be canceled, that you're just going to be, you're not going to be fired from your job, all these things, then what's stopping you from saying anything hateful, right? And that's a part of this has to do also with, there's this guy, you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt?
Yes.
Jonathan Haidt started this group, this organization called the Heterodox Academy. And the idea it being that orthodoxy is bad, having to conform to stated norms or whatever is a bad thing. And so we should have, we should be heterodox. We should accept all viewpoints. This idea of viewpoint diversity is a big thing there. But, so what that leads to is Holocaust deniers, scientific racists, people who are preaching economic doctrines that are completely false, like trickle-down economics. These guys are able to exist within the academic space in this country, and again, I wouldn't want to see this stuff punished by the government, but I certainly think that other academics can get together and say, no, this person is wrong. We don't want them speaking on our campus. This person is, has published, dozens of papers, several books, that are all advocating, things that could lead to genocide, eugenics, things like that, and say, we don't want this on our campus. I don't see how you can run an academy if you don't, aside from teaching things that are true and things that are, I don't see how you can avoid saying, and this is false. You have to be willing to reject. You have to be willing to reject what's wrong. If somebody's going to come on, wants to come teach elementary students, and they have a published paper saying 2 + 2 = 5, how the hell are you letting them teach math?
Absolutely. And this, this like creationism, right, is another great example, right? Because at what, and I am, as I hate the slippery slope argument. The idea, I think it's lazy. I think that, the idea that we can't find a reasonable place to draw the line, I think I think that is just a sidestepping, attempting to sidestep an important issue. But there has to be a point where I'm just thinking about this off the cuff, because this is a really sort of thorny issue without clear answers. But there has to be a point in which we say no, that's just not true. And we don't think that and there's things that we can say that are objectively not true. I'm not talking about debatable things, everybody out there.
Right, no, exactly.
Right? I'm not talking about things about which reasonable people can disagree. I'm talking about things that are default. Like Holocaust denying, right? No, that really did happen. And it's not just false, Sean. It's false, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it leads to these ideas these rekindling. We talked about American History X last week, right? Yeah. These ideas get credence, and they become more mainstream, and that is bad for democracy.
Well, you had the Enlightenment basically got us out of the Dark Ages. Okay, it got us to stop listening to supernatural explanations. It got us to reject the authority of the church. It got people into scientific inquiry, where it's like, if you want to say something or about reality, you have to do the experiments. You have to make the theory. You have to publish the paper. You have to go through peer review. All these things evolved over hundreds of years during the course of the Enlightenment, right? And so then now it's the 21st century. We've got 500 years of this history of all this to build on. And you've got people who want to seriously bring up stuff, Dark Age mentalities like the flat Earth, or rejecting the germ theory of disease, being against vaccinations, things like that. They are dangerous. These are dangerous, deadly, threatening ideologies. They're not funny. They're not. We're not talking about something that is going to. We know these ideas are going to make society worse. We know they're going to basically ruin civilization, because you start having people believing these things, and they start to cluster together with people who believe other bogus things. Flat earthers don't just believe in the flat earth. They'll believe in QAnon, and they'll believe in the 5G. They'll start burning the 5G towers. You start having the destabilization of civilization based on the allowance of these sort of dark age mentalities coming in. So again, I want to stress again. China just cracked down on Hong Kong. They just changed the law. They just took away Hong Kong's free speech, and it is horrible. And I never want to see anything like that happen. Okay, they are now they're able to, in Hong Kong now, they're able to arrest you based on internet searches, based on internet postings that you made even before the law was put into effect. You can't demonstrate in the street. They're cleaning out libraries of books. it's when you take away free speech, it's a horrible thing, but it is really a double-edged sword because too much free speech can be, it's like, it could be just as bad. So, I mean, that's why we're talking about this, and it's become such an issue.
It's become such a debate, and and some of the smartest people out there, right? People, I mean, Steven Pinker. I mean, come on, Steven Pinker. Reading Steven Pinker's books revolutionized the way I thought about the world.
Changed my life. Really, Steven Pinker is amazing.
Amazing, brilliant guy. But but you have a lot of these same sort of crowd. Oh, by the way, it's Sam Harris also, right? Sam Harris, and I have my problem with Sam Harris, but these are people whose books, especially their early books, were just eye-opening reads for me, right? Changed my perspective on the planet and life itself and myself for the better. Still, these are also, and it's also telling that they're frequently white people, right, who are not going to be impacted by these it's just telling that you have people like Steven Pinker, who's sitting in Harvard, right, and telling the children to keep their mouths shut. And it's like, look, he has this megaphone. He's able to say whatever he wants. He doesn't like being told not to say what he wants, and I get that. But it's really easy to sort of get in that mentality when it's like, look, if the fucking if the fascists come, right, I'm in a sort of category where I'm probably going to be okay, right, as long as and so I just find it sort of disingenuous or for sort of very powerful people, relatively powerful, like with big microphones and platforms, to say, look, we get to say what we want. You don't get to say what you like, but your boycotts, your all that kind of stuff, like, you can't do that though. So the only way that you're able to actually make it, like, force change, you can't do that. But don't worry, I can with my books. I find that to be disingenuous and frankly, like we're talking about, dangerous. We could talk about Russia. We could talk about China. We could talk about these places where free speech is curtailed. But we also want to go with this to the sort of dystopian, that dystopia. Clearly, we don't want that. But nipping these bad ideas in the bud, ideas that undergird our entire democracy, right?
Right.
It's important. It's important,
Well, and that's it. And you're really talking about, when you say, let's get rid of cancel culture, okay? Well, cancel culture is people. It's human beings who are expressing their viewpoint. Like when I decide, for example, like, we have to talk about J.K. Rowling, because she's one of the ones who signed it. And she is a freaking hypocrite, to sign that thing, okay? I mean, because it is direct, like, she has just within the last few weeks, herself been kind of canceled, right? So for her to get up there as if she's sort of objective and signing this letter saying that we should cancel culture,
yes.
I mean, that's completely fucked, all right? I mean, it's just because, she doesn't want to be held accountable. And this is a problem with anybody who gets a lot of power. I mean, she has been beloved by literally billions of people. Billions of people have read her work. And she is, again, just like Steven Pinker, changed a lot of lives for the better. I mean, she introduced, a gay character. She seemed to have been very progressive in her writing, and was loved by liberals and conservatives alike. I mean, there was, I think a few conservatives might have had a problem with the gay character, but at the same time, she was loved by all, pretty much. And then decided to put her foot in her mouth about the trans issue. And, the reaction has been severe, and rightfully so, because these are people who are literally fighting for the right to exist, for the right to exist. So she took, and I often say trauma breeds trauma, right? And so J.K. Rowling obviously experienced some trauma, some sexual trauma in her life, and she talked about that in her statement. And I mean, I would never, like, she has a right to have every bit of sympathy from everyone for that trauma. But then to turn that around and use that trauma to create trauma for millions. She has a powerful platform, very, very powerful. Exactly. So millions, possibly tens of millions of transgender women are going to be impacted by what she said.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so,
absolutely.
So all of her fans, not all, but many of her fans have just said, no, we're not okay with this. We're not going to put up with this. And
we're not going to put up with it. And you talk about accountability, Sean, like accountability, and that is the key, right? Because and we talk about, where that reminds me of is Roger Stone. You see him coming out of jail with his stupid fucking hat on, with that smirk on his face, and you're like, he just like no accountability. 7 felonies, right? And he just walks. So the question, so again, accountability is so critical here because, like you say, and it's about hierarchy and it's about accountability, right? The further up the hierarchy you go, the people feel less and less like they deserve to have to be accountable. From Elon Musk to Kanye West to J.K. Rowling, on and on and on. It's this idea like, no, I get to just do whatever I want because I'm rich, I'm powerful, or whatever. And what the cancel culture does,
and what they're saying is,
why they hate it so much.
They're saying, "Fuck you," It's like,
exactly. They hate it so much because it's the only way that the masses can keep people in check, like powerful people in check.
It's the only way. And so they call it Twitter mobs, but it's like, how else does anybody else talk, right? Because freedom of speech to you and me, I mean, we're making this video and, we hope we have a lot of viewers, but, the reality is that we don't really have a big platform. And so, for us, this is our way to make our voice known, but collectively, right? Collectively, if we band together with a million other people who are condemning J.K. Rowling, that voice is heard. That voice is heard. And that is what cancel culture is accountability. And I think it's the only way to balance out, like you said, these powerful people. And you look at Donald Trump with his Twitter feed, and he's literally violating Twitter's terms of service, and he's violating Facebook terms of service, and he gets away with it. So finally, they tag his post one time, and he's going to sign an executive order, shut them down, or regulate them, or whatever it is. And it's what ends up happening is that these people, the more powerful they get, the more they seem to whine. They feel like, how dare anybody, my royal highness, my royal worshipfulness has spoken. How dare anybody, say a word?
Yeah, that's exactly right, man. That's exactly right. And, I say this, I'm just riffing a little bit now, but before I went to school, to law school, and then worked at a big law firm in New York, I had never really spent time. I mean, I grew up in an area that was pretty affluent. I'm not that my family particularly was, but pretty affluent area. Around some wealthy people, but not until I got to law school were I around really wealthy people, right? Like people that are like really wealthy, right? And it's even more so in the law firm setting because these are people that are coming, with like a private matter, not even like a company, but like a matter to pay me, junior associate, like a few $100s an hour or whatever, and they can come, they're comfortable paying this. So it's like those kind of people, the level of entitlement that you get at that level, and that's what I'm getting at here, is it's astonishing. It's astonishing what people in those sort of powerful positions who have a lot, they're just so used to never being told no. They just, no one ever tells them no. And so the only way you're able to sort of confront that kind of power is through masses. This is why conservatives and hierarchical sort of fetishizers are upset about protests in the street, right? They literally refer to them as the mob, right? I mean, McConnell says this all the time. Mob rule. You mean democracy? Like he describes, right? He describes it as like, what are you talking about? Like one person, one vote is mob rule? What are you fucking talking about? It's astonishing. But again, these people, their mentality is that I get to do what I want because I have X. And again, it's all about that hierarchy, man. It's all about that hierarchy.
Right. Well, so that's why I think, it's very, very important that the citizens be able to speak back to powerful people. And I think one of the problems that happens is that with academia, right? You have academia, some people don't think that represents citizenship because it's a few people, it's a committee, it's a university provost or whatever it is who is shutting down something, right? And
Sure.
what do you think about that? I mean, how should academia decide whether somebody gets a platform?
This is a really, really interesting question. I think it's a really thorny one, and I have mixed feelings about this particular issue because, I think academic freedom is a concept that is. I took a course of this in law school. Academic freedom is a concept that's has a robust sort of jurisprudential background. That's what tenure is all about, right? The idea of being able to say what you want and not have to deal with the consequences. Same thing with judicial, federal judicial judgeships, right? So you're able to be put in this position without being worried, not having to be accountable. But the problem is you're not accountable. So the question is, so in the academic sphere, how do we address that? I think that, first, maybe a good way to start to get into this conversation is talk about the sort of postmodernist left that sort of like flourishing on campuses, and that is one of the things I have zero tolerance for. The idea that we get to make up our own reality as we go, or that we just get to make up constructs as we go, like that. No, the blank slate idea that we're just born basically like a blank slate and then society creates us is absurd. And I think that when you start getting, and then when you start shutting down sort of opposition to those ideas, I think that's a problem. That is a problem, right? And that is a line that we can draw and say, no. Don't shut down, let's not shut down dissenting voices for the sake of shutting down dissenting voices. But I think there's a distinction to be made there between that and people coming on campus and just spewing hate, right? And I don't know, what do you think about it?
Well, okay, so when Kellyanne Conway got on TV a couple days after Trump got elected, and she introduced the nation to the concept of alternative facts, that was the first time I'd ever heard that term, okay? Alternative facts. I'm thinking to myself, okay, now, where have we heard this before? And where we've heard this before is the postmodern left. The postmodern left gave a gold-wrapped gift to the right wing when it comes to this stuff, right? Because what happened is that the postmodern left essentially applied this to, language, right? Like social constructivism and all of these types of issues of deconstructing language, deconstructing hierarchy through literature. There's a whole. I'm not an expert in this. I studied engineering with a minor in political science, so but I know there's a whole academic discipline of postmodern thought. That has sought to break down, specifically hierarchy of Western scholarship, right? But Absolutely. It has gone overboard. And I understand that there's a need to break down hierarchy. I understand there's a need to look at, colonialism within academia and the way that people of color have been treated and marginalized, women have been marginalized. All of those things are all very true. But to me, you don't need to create an alternative reality, of postmodernism where nothing has any meaning, where all meaning is created subjectively, right? You don't need to do that because you open the door then for a political nightmare where suddenly the entire right wing is doing this about reality. So now we have climate change denial. We have COVID can't be dealt with. Nothing is real anymore when you're on the right. It's whatever the leader says it is. It becomes a total cult. So
absolutely.
I don't know,
But you know what? And again, this gets to I keep coming back to the slippery slope argument because the argument always is that, look, if we do this, then if we restrict this, then next thing you know, they're going to want to restrict that. And I think that, and I think it's kind of applies here. I think we can find a way to draw the line. And I think we draw the line by you basically tie it to facts, right? So example, and I know that is slippery because of the alternative fact idea, which is absurd, but what you were talking about is so true, is that if we're going to do this on the left, they're doing this on the right. So if we create the safe space for being able to make up facts as you go along, then they're going to do that, and they're going to do that, and they're going to turn that, as they have, they're going to turn that fire hose right back on us. So what we have to do is try and find a way to anchor anchor discussions about restricting speech in things that are true. So you don't get to come on a campus and just and deny the Holocaust. You know, right? The provost says,
I think we can all agree on that.
We're not doing that.
We can all agree on that. But what about biology, though? What about sociobiology? Because that was one of Steven Pinker's beefs. Is that a lot of the basis of evolutionary psychology is that, you know, the mind evolved just like the body evolved. So there are certain natural human tendencies that are cross-cultural, and some of those tendencies are things that the left really doesn't like, you know. And
exactly.
So there have been a number of evolutionary biologists who've been prevented from speaking on campus because they were discussing things that, you know, were uncomfortable for the left. And so, you know, I think that's a lot of where, I think that's why Steven Pinker signed the document, you know. And that's why a number of people have signed the doc, because they're very concerned that there are things that the left doesn't want to look at, you know. But I find that I find that those things are kind of tempest in a teapot, really, compared to the big issues that of the way that the right has distorted facts, you know, and the way that
absolutely,
because they will take those same sociobiology, evolutionary psychology, whatever ideas and turn them into scientific racism and eugenics, right?
Absolutely. So, and that is the slippery slope that the left does not want to slide down, right? That's why no one wants to talk about human nature as a biological reality, right? Because then people are like, well, if you do that, then people are going to start talking about we're going to start talking about eugenics, and they'll start talking about social Darwinism and blah 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 blah, blah, right? And I very much understand that argument, but this gets back to my point. It's like, but evolutionary psychology has scientific basis, though, right? You know what I'm saying?
We can allow that there is a bell curve in various traits in humans,
sure.
In intelligence and everything else. We can allow that. A right winger is going to say, well, that justifies eugenics. I'm going to say, the hell it does.
No, it doesn't.
It does not. You know, so
definitely
why
doesn't.
not? You know, why not have that conversation on campus, right? Why not have that conversation to say, hey, you know, these things need to be discussed. It doesn't mean we want to have eugenics. It means we want to have actually more support for the disadvantaged, right?
Absolutely. I mean, like, how about the achievement gap, right? Like, we talk about the achievement gap, right? Like, but people don't want to talk about the fact that overall, right, Black people don't make as right. Obviously, the achievement gap is there, but like, don't do as well in school. Right. There's a whole lot of different things, and also we can also talk about the fact that literally, and this is going to really piss off liberals here, but like, you know, the idea that, look, I mean, this is the way biology works, right? Like, if two people that are not particularly intelligent have a child, the odds are you're going to have a child that is not that intelligent. I'm not saying that there's not outliers. There's all kinds of factors that go into that. Nature, nurture, the whole shebang. But the point is that biology matters. And so if we talk about the fact that Black people have been undereducated, underprivileged for 400 years. I mean, for all American history. Yeah. Right. The odds are that a bunch of uneducated people marrying each other are going to end up over time having people with less achievement. Like, and that's an uncomfortable thing for liberals to think about. But like, it's just the point. But it's nothing inherent to Black people. I mean, you could swap white people in there.
Well, the bell curves kind of go like, there's a slight skewing of the bell curve, maybe one way or the other. But there's much more difference within races than there is between races, right?
Exactly.
So it doesn't have to lead to a dystopia. It doesn't have to lead to saying we're going to force sterilization now. You know, it's like, and that's
right. All of a sudden now we're like forced sterilization. Like no, we're just talking about facts, right? And we shouldn't be afraid to talk about facts. Like you say, that's what Steven Pinker was. That's why Steven Pinker. You and I know Steven Pinker's work a lot. So, you know, he harps on this stuff all the time. I mean, the entire book, The Blank Slate, is basically this argument, right?
Yeah.
So, excellent book, by the way, out there. Read it. But we can talk about like we shouldn't be afraid to talk about difficult topics. But I don't think that it follows that that free speech should just be a free for all, because then the loud voices are going to the loudest voices are going to be bigotry on the right. That's what's going to happen always.
Well, and this is what this letter has conflated. Okay, the sort of suppression of valid academics, okay, that occurs with the very righteous and correct response toward hate speech.
Exact. Wow, you just nailed it, dude. That was it. That's it. That's exactly right. That statement basically is that encapsulates the whole thing.
Yeah. So I mean, what do we do? The thing is that my initial reaction to this letter is to be kind of upset about it, to be pretty outraged about it, because I feel like it's going to lead to yet more shouting down of people who are coming up with, righteous criticism.
Absolutely.
And so, I think this letter was not a good thing, but at the same time, I wish there was a way to do what, Jonathan Haidt, Steven Pinker, and these people want to do without enabling people like J.K. Rowling or Tucker Carlson, for that matter, or Kevin Spacey, or any of these other people who've been canceled for real cause. I wish Tucker Carlson would get canceled, for fuck's sake.
Oh my God! I can't wait till the day he finally says something that's too far. I really hope he does. I think he's going to keep pushing the envelope. That's the thing about right-wing propaganda and hate like that. The more you people, but then you have to keep upping the ante to make it more sexy. It's like doing a drug. You have to do more and more and more of it. So eventually, you're going to say something that's just so over the top that you're just going to. I hope so.
I hope so. Well, the thing is that his head writer, who basically, probably puts pretty much of almost every word he says into his mouth. He's to Tucker Carlson the way Stephen Miller is to Trump, right? So, exactly. Tucker Carlson doesn't open his mouth without this writer. And it turns out that this writer had been hate posting and shit posting for a year, 18 months. I don't know. There was harassment of a woman. There was racist and sexist language, and so he had to resign just in the last couple of days. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, that guy had to resign, but what Tucker Carlson is saying every day is the same thing.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. It's just put into words. I mean, Tucker Carlson talks about, Black Lives Matter when they come for you. When they come for you, right? I mean, all they're trying to do is say, don't kill us. Don't kill us when we're innocent of a crime. Don't kill us without a trial. And Tucker turns that around into being some sort of Nazi mob. I mean, it's literally, it couldn't be more 180 degrees from what's really going on. And that is very harmful to our civilization.
It sure is. I mean, we didn't talk at all about the Rushmore speech, the Mount Rushmore speech, but what a fucking, I mean, it was just the American Carnage speech part 2. But one of the things that he says in that was, left-wing fascism. Right? Like, what does that even mean?
That's like square circles. It's an oxymoron.
It doesn't mean anything.
It's a complete total oxymoron. I mean, and what they mean by that is the same thing that they're meaning with cancel culture.
Exactly.
Essentially, is like we don't want you to be able to talk back to us.
Exactly, dude. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. It's like a couple of things that we keep coming back to is lack of accountability and hierarchy, which is basically like, if I'm on top of the hierarchy, I don't owe anybody anything. And by the way, that's the same thing when we see with the masks. We talked about masks last time, and it's the same idea. It's like, I don't owe it to anybody to wear a mask, right? my rights trump everyone else's, no pun intended, trump everyone else's, and I shouldn't have to wear a mask because I don't owe anybody anything, is the idea, right? And it's wrong because we live in a society and we must owe each other basic courtesy, or else our society literally falls apart. But it's also just dangerous, right? Because coronavirus is literally dangerous, but this whole idea of unaccountability, it's anti-democracy. It is anti-democracy. It's anti-rule of law. There must be accountability, either social accountability, right? Cancel whatever, boycotts, or just ostracizing, right? Or on the other hand, government intervention.
Well, there's some precedent in the law, for if you yell fire in a crowded theater and there's a stampede and people get hurt, you can be held liable. What's the law? What's the tort there? What's the crime when you yell fire in a crowded theater?
That's a great question. I'm sure that I bet you every state has its own sort of version of it, but I'm sure like just it like I mean it's probably akin to an incitement to violence, right? I
Incitement to
mean just
violence or
because
just disturbing
you
the
know
peace,
disturbing the peace.
whatever it is. But it's anyway, it's a crime. And I kind of feel, I mean, I feel very strongly actually that advocating not wearing masks or advocating not being vaccinated is dangerous in the very exact same way. I mean, you are killing people. If you convince
Exactly.
someone not to get vaccinated, right, and enough people do that, then you will be there will be an outbreak. I mean, this has happened with measles. It's
Absolutely.
happened with with pertussis. I mean, there was an outbreak. This is an interesting story. Is that when my middle son was born, uh, he was 2 weeks old, and there was a pertussis outbreak in the school we were, and turned out that a lot of parents there had not been vaccinated. And
Wow.
so I had to put my little baby 2-week-old son onto intravenous antibiotics that were very risky for him, very
Jesus.
risky, right? Because the doctor said if he catches pertussis at 2 weeks, he'll die. So
Wow.
this is a direct experience that I have had with this anti-vaccine, right?
Right.
And so this was
Right.
an idea. This idea of anti-vax spread through the community that we were in, and any number of parents thought, well, I'm not going to vaccinate my kid because I'm not sure. And then they endangered all the children. And as soon as when that was all over with, I mean, my son was fine, but when that was all over with, they all had to get vaccinated. You know,
Wow.
they were all, they all had to get vaccinated. So my point is the idea itself is dangerous. It's deadly. It can kill people.
Exactly.
And the same thing with the mask protest. If you're out there making fun of people for wearing masks, or if you're out there protesting for the right not to wear a mask, you're literally protesting for the right to kill people.
Absolutely. You know what? You know what? This brings to mind an important concept in First Amendment law, particularly with the right to assemble, which is a reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions that can be that government can place on the way you do things. So yes, you have the right to assemble. You do not have a First Amendment right to say block a highway. People do it because it's civil. That's what makes it civil disobedience, right?
Right.
Because you're actually flouting the law on purpose to make a
Yeah.
point. But the government has a right to restrict, right? That's why when you go to a protest, right, there's a little specific space for you to protest, right? Like you can protest,
Yeah.
right? You can't, right? So the point is that like none of these freedoms, and we've talked about this, and you've talked about this a lot, I think, Sean, and that is none of these rights are absolute. None of them are. And this is the same thing with the Second Amendment, right? It's not, you can't own a tank, right? You can't own a fighter jet. No matter how much money you have, you cannot own a fighter jet, right? You just cannot. And those are rules that we make to protect society. So why can't we also do this with speech?
Well, this is the thing. If you can restrict, like one of the fundamental four freedoms in the First Amendment is freedom of religion. Another one's freedom of assembly. Well,
Sure.
The government in a pandemic can tell churches they cannot have a service.
Exactly.
That is something the government can do. It's been upheld by the courts, and you can do that. So why not in a pandemic? Why can you not tell people that they're not allowed to protest masks?
Right. Exactly. Or right.
Or vaccinations. Or
vaccinations. Right. And people in right. And these same people are people that are advocating for the government to be able to keep women from getting abortions, which is the irony of all of this. Right. You know, right. I mean, it's like, well, you know what I mean? Like, what do you like? What? So wait. So where do you draw the line? You don't want you're upset because the government's forcing you to put on a mask, but you're upset, but you're perfectly okay with the government literally telling a woman that she cannot do what she wants to do with her own physical body. Wow.
No, and this is the whole thing is, and this is kind of wrap it up. I think we're getting close to our time now, but
Sure.
the free speech, I mean, it's endless. We touched on so many different areas today, and I'm so glad all the points that you brought up, because it just demonstrates how difficult it really is to come to some sort of a reasonable accommodation where you can allow for a free society, but you can prevent the harm. I mean, and I think it's something we have to have an ongoing conversation about, because the unrestricted First Amendment would be like allowing people to own tanks.
Exactly. It's the same idea. It is dangerous. There's a reason why we have rules. We live in a society. Our freedoms are necessarily curtailed to some extent. It's just a debate about how we curtail them. That's all. And what I propose, and I think what we're proposing here, is that it ought to be based on a harm principle. That's the bottom line, right? It's a balancing test. You figure out like a utilitarian balancing test, essentially, right? And things like advocating violence, advocating not wearing masks, whatever else, end up being literally way more harm than good. Way more harm. Yes, it does curtail people's freedom, and that is somewhat, in some sense, bad. But the outcome, it's obvious. It's obvious, and I'll let you talk us off.
Well, all of society is a trade-off. Everything we do in society is a trade-off between rights and freedoms. And I think that that's, something that that your most basic law class is going to, in your intro lecture, is going to say that, and also ethical goals conflict with one another, and you're going to have some people who, these like a religious person might feel very, very put upon if the government says, and as a matter of fact, some of them did, they actually sued the government in many cases, to be able to keep meeting. And then they did. And then the ones who were allowed to keep meeting lost members of their congregation, sadly, So that's really the end of the story. And that's the last thing that I, really want to say is just that, everything is a trade-off. And if we don't make those trade-offs, by default, we'll have a worse outcome.
Absolutely. And I'll just, I guess, close out by just saying, like, it's just agreeing with you. I'm glad we had this talk, Sean, because, this is such a thorny issue, and it's kind of, we're bumping up against a big American taboo, right? And so we've like, hopefully we've stimulated some thought, upset some people, but hopefully they'll come back. But I think that, but I really enjoyed the conversation, Sean. I think this is again, an ongoing dialogue we should have with each other, and that we have to have in this country. And, just thank you for being here. Thank you everyone out there for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you, Christophe. It's been great.